My twin sister showed up covered in bruises. When I found out her husband was abusing her, I switched places with her and taught him a lesson he'll never forget. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, grab a warm cup of tea and get comfortable. I'd love to know what time of day you're watching this video. Please comment M for morning, A for afternoon, or E for evening. Now, let me take you into this story. The sound of the knock wasn't loud. It was a weak, desperate thud against the wood, the kind of sound a wounded animal makes when it collapses. I was in the middle of my evening routine, wiping down my kitchen counters with the precision that 20 years in the military police had drilled into me. My apartment in Columbus was quiet, orderly, and safe, everything my life had been since I left home. I checked the clock. 11:42 p.m. Nobody visits at this hour. I approached the door, my instincts flaring up. I didn't ask who it was. I just looked through the peephole. What I saw made my blood run cold and then boil in a span of a single second. I threw the door open. There she was. Linda. My twin sister. The person I hadn't spoken to in a decade. She was slumped against the doorframe, wearing a raincoat that was 2 sizes too big and smelled like wet dog and fear. But it was her face that stopped my heart. One eye was swollen shut, a grotesque shade of purple and black. Her lip was split, caked with dried blood. She looked at me with her one good eye, her pupils dilated and shaking. "Brenda," she whispered, her voice cracking like dry leaves. "Help me." Then she collapsed into my arms. She was so light. Too light. Linda used to be the soft one, the one with the curves, but now she felt like a bag of bird bones. I didn't waste time asking questions. I drove her straight to the emergency room, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I went into officer mode. I needed to be calm. I needed to be efficient. If I let myself feel what I was actually feeling, the absolute rage, I would have driven my truck through a wall. At the hospital, while the doctors worked on her, I stood in the hallway, staring at the fluorescent lights. The doctor came out an hour later, looking exhausted. "She has 2 broken ribs, a fractured wrist that healed poorly from a previous injury, and severe bruising on her torso and legs," he told me, his voice low. "And Mrs. Davis, she's malnourished. We're keeping her sedated for the pain." I walked into her room. She looked small in that hospital bed. I pulled up a chair and sat there for a long time, just watching her chest rise and fall. I reached out and gently pulled up the sleeve of her hospital gown. It was a map of hell. Old bruises. New bruises. Cigarette burns. Finger marks shaped like a vice grip around her upper arm. This wasn't an accident. This was systematic torture. And I knew exactly who did it. Gary. The man she chose over me 10 years ago. The high school quarterback with the charming smile and the dead eyes. I stood up and walked to the bathroom mirror in the hospital room. I looked at my reflection. We were identical twins, Linda and I, same nose, same jawline, same eyes. But where her eyes were filled with fear, mine were hard. Where her body was soft and broken, mine was hardened by years of combat training and daily gym sessions. I was 5 pounds of muscle heavier, but in a baggy sweater, nobody would tell the difference. An idea formed in my mind. It was crazy. It was dangerous. But looking at my sister's broken body, I realized the law wouldn't save her. A restraining order is just a piece of paper to a monster. He needed to be broken. He needed to feel fear. I took a pair of scissors from the emergency kit in my bag. I always carried a go bag. I looked at my reflection one last time. My hair was long, usually tied in a strict ponytail. Linda's hair had been chopped short, unevenly, probably by him. Snip. Locks of my hair fell into the sink. I cut it to match hers. I washed off my makeup. I practiced slumping my shoulders, hiding my strength, making myself look small. When I walked out of that bathroom, Brenda was gone. I was Linda. I leaned over my sister's sleeping form and whispered, "Rest now, sis. You stay here where it's safe. I'm going to go take care of the trash." I took her keys from her coat pocket. I took her ID. I paid the nurse to keep a strict no visitors policy for the next 48 hours, flashing my old badge just enough to make her think it was official business. I drove to the address on her license. It was an old house in the rundown part of town, a place that looked like it was rotting from the inside out. I stood on the porch. My heart wasn't racing from fear, it was steady. A cold, predatory rhythm. I put the key in the lock. It turned with a rusty screech. I pushed the door open. The smell of stale beer and unwashed clothes hit me instantly. "You decided to drag your useless carcass back here?" A voice slurred from the darkness of the living room. "I was just about to come find you and finish what I started." I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The lock clicked. He thought his victim had returned. He had no idea he had just locked himself in with his executioner. To understand why I walked into that house, you have to understand the silence. 10 years of it. Growing up, Linda and I were inseparable, but we were different. Linda was the dreamer. She wanted the white picket fence, the fairy tale, the love story. She was soft, pliable, always trying to please everyone. I was the protector. I was the one who got into fistfights on the playground when boys pulled her pigtails. I was the one who questioned everything. Then came Gary. He showed up in our small town like he owned the place. He was older, loud, and flashy with money he didn't actually have. He zeroed in on Linda like a shark sensing blood in the water. He showered her with cheap gifts and grand promises. To Linda, he was her Prince Charming. To me, he was a walking red flag. I tried to warn her. I remember the night clearly. It was 2 weeks before their wedding. We were in our shared bedroom, packing her things. "He's controlling, Linda," I had said, holding up a dress Gary had forbidden her to wear because it was too revealing. "He checks your phone. He isolates you from your friends. That's not love." Linda snatched the dress from my hand. Her face was flushed with anger, a rare sight for her. "You don't understand him, Brenda. You're just jealous because no one has ever looked at you the way he looks at me. You're too hard. You're too cold. That's why you're alone." Her words cut deeper than any knife. Jealous? Was I? Maybe a part of me was envious of how easily she trusted, but mostly, I was terrified. "I'm not jealous," I said quietly. "I'm scared for you. If you marry him, he will destroy you." "Get out," she screamed. "If you can't be happy for me, then I don't want you at the wedding. I don't want you in my life." So, I left. I didn't just leave the room, I left the state. I joined the army the next week. I poured all my pain and frustration into basic training. I became a military police officer because I wanted to enforce order in a chaotic world. I excelled. I learned combat, I learned discipline, and I learned how to take down men twice my size without breaking a sweat. But I never called. Every birthday, I picked up the phone, stared at the dial pad, and then put it down. Her words, "I don't want you in my life," echoed in my head. I thought I was respecting her wishes. I thought I was letting her live her fairy tale. I told myself that if things were bad, she would reach out. She would call Mom and Dad. But Mom and Dad died in a car accident 4 years ago. Linda came to the funeral with Gary. I was deployed overseas and couldn't make it back in time. I heard from a cousin that Gary did all the talking, that Linda looked tired. I told myself it was grief. I told myself she had her husband to lean on. What a fool I was. The silence wasn't her choice. It was his design. He had isolated her completely. He had cut the phone lines, metaphorically and literally. He had made her believe that nobody wanted her, that she had burned all her bridges. Standing in that hospital room earlier tonight, looking at the fracture in her wrist that the doctor said was years old, the guilt hit me harder than a physical blow. I had abandoned her. I had let my pride get in the way of protecting the one person I swore to look after. I remembered the way we used to communicate without speaking when we were kids. One look, and we knew what the other was thinking. Tonight, when she looked at me with that bruised, swollen eye, I heard her loud and clear. She wasn't just asking for help. She was asking for salvation. I looked down at my hands. These hands had held rifles, handcuffed criminals, and broken down doors. For 10 years, I had used my strength for the government, for strangers. Now, I was going to use it for the only person who mattered. I wasn't just going back to that house to beat up a bully. I was going back to reclaim the 10 years he stole from us. I was going back to prove that Linda wasn't alone. As I sat in my truck outside Gary's house, waiting for the courage to open that car door, I replayed the doctor's list of injuries in my head. Malnourished. Broken ribs. He hadn't just hurt her body, he had tried to erase her soul. He wanted a slave, a punching bag. He wanted someone weak. Well, he wanted Linda. But he was about to get Brenda. And God have mercy on him, because I certainly wouldn't. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing me inside the lion's den. Or rather, the rat's nest. The first thing that hit me wasn't the fear, it was the smell. It was a thick, suffocating cocktail of stale cigarette smoke, fried grease, damp mildew, and something sour, like milk that had been left out for a week. It took every ounce of my discipline not to wrinkle my nose. Well, are you deaf? I turned slowly toward the living room. My eyes adjusted to the dim light coming from the television. There he was. Gary. He was sprawled out on a recliner that looked like it had survived a war, a beer bottle dangling from his hand. He was bigger than I remembered, not muscular, but bloated. His face was puffy, his eyes red-rimmed and glassy. He looked like a man who had peaked in high school and had been sliding downhill ever since. Next to him, on the sofa, sat an older woman. This had to be Joyce, his mother. She was watching a game show, shelling peanuts and letting the shells fall directly onto the carpet. She didn't even look up when I entered. "I'm hungry," Gary grumbled, not moving from his chair. "You disappeared for 6 hours. Where's my dinner?" I had to think fast. I had to be Linda. How would Linda react? She would cower. She would apologize. I hunched my shoulders forward, making myself look smaller. I lowered my head, letting my hair fall over my face to hide the lack of fresh bruises on my left cheek. I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice trembling. It wasn't hard to fake the tremble, the rage was making me vibrate. I got lost. Lost? A shrill voice came from the corner. I looked over. Sitting at the dining table, painting her toenails a bright, tacky pink, was a woman who looked like a melted version of Gary. Cheryl. His sister. I knew about her from the few letters Linda sent before the silence began. The sister-in-law from hell. "You've lived here for 10 years, you idiot," Cheryl sneered, not looking up from her toes. "Mom, did you hear that?" She got lost. Joyce finally tore her eyes away from the TV. Her gaze was cold, reptilian. "Useless," she spat. "Just like her mother." "Well, don't just stand there like a statue. Go make something. Gary is starving." I walked toward the kitchen, my boots sticking slightly to the linoleum floor. The kitchen was a disaster zone. Dirty dishes were piled high in the sink, encrusted with days-old food. Flies buzzed around an open trash can. But then I saw something that made me freeze. Under the kitchen table, deep in the shadows, was a pair of eyes. Big, terrified eyes staring out from a small, pale face. It was a little girl. Penny. My niece. I had only seen pictures of her as a baby, sent by a relative. She was 4 years old now. She should have been playing, laughing, running around. Instead, she was curled up in a tight ball, clutching a headless doll, pressing herself against the table leg as if trying to disappear into the wood. She was wearing a dirty t-shirt that was too small for her. Her arms were stick-thin. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Linda hadn't just been protecting herself, she had been trying to survive for this little girl. I crouched down slowly, ignoring the filth on the floor. I tried to soften my expression, to look like the mother she knew. "Penny?" I whispered. "It's Mommy." The girl flinched. She actually flinched at the sound of my voice. She didn't rush to hug me. She pushed herself further back into the shadows, her eyes darting toward the living room where Gary was belching loud enough to shake the walls. She wasn't just afraid of him. She was afraid of everyone. She was afraid of the world. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She looked at me, confused. Children are perceptive. She sensed something different. Maybe it was the way I moved, or the fact that I wasn't crying. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's okay. Come here." She shook her head vigorously. "Daddy said, no eating until he eats." The rage that surged through me then was so hot I thought I might spontaneously combust. He was starving a 4-year-old child because his dinner wasn't ready? I stood up. I gripped the edge of the counter, the metal biting into my palms. I took a deep breath. Not yet, I told myself. If you kill him now, you go to jail, and Penny goes into the system. Stick to the plan. I opened the fridge. It was mostly beer. There was some wilted lettuce, a jar of pickles, and a package of ground beef that looked gray. "What's taking so long?" Gary shouted from the other room. "Do I have to come in there and help you speed up?" The threat hung in the air, heavy and familiar. I could feel the ghost of the beatings Linda had endured in this very kitchen. "I'm hurrying," I called back, my voice pitching up to mimic Linda's panic. I grabbed the beef. I grabbed a skillet. As I turned on the stove, I looked at the reflection in the window. A battered woman in a house of monsters. But monsters have a weakness. They think they are the only things with teeth in the dark. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The next morning, the sun struggled to get through the grime on the windows. I had spent the night on a thin mattress in the guest room. Apparently, Linda had been banished there months ago because her coughing annoyed Gary. That was fine by me. It gave me space to strategize. I woke up at 5 o'clock, my internal alarm clock going off. I did 20 push-ups quietly on the floor just to get the blood flowing, then put on Linda's shapeless housecoat. I needed to observe the enemy in their natural habitat. The house came alive around 8 a.m., and it was a circus of dysfunction. Gary was still asleep, his snoring rattling the doorframe of the master bedroom. But the ladies were up. Joyce sat at the kitchen table, banging her coffee mug for a refill like she was in a diner. Cheryl was there too, looking through a pile of mail. "Bill, collection notice." Cheryl tossed the envelopes onto the sticky floor. "Hey, Linda. You need to call the electric company. They're threatening to cut us off again." I was standing by the stove, making eggs. "Why don't you pay it, Cheryl?" I asked, keeping my back to them. Silence. Absolute silence. "Excuse me?" Cheryl's voice dripped with venom. "What did you just say?" I turned around, remembering to hunch my shoulders. I just meant, I don't have any money left from the grocery budget." Well, ask your rich aunt or something, Joyce snapped. And don't get smart with us. You're lucky we let you live here. A useless woman who can't even keep her husband happy. Let her live here? This was Linda's house. Our parents had left Linda a modest inheritance, and she had used it to put the down payment on this place. These parasites had moved in, taken over, and convinced her she was a guest in her own home. Then, the back door slammed open. A boy ran in, muddy shoes stomping all over the floor I had just swept, mostly to check for hidden weapons or exits. It was Kyle, Cheryl's 8-year-old son. He was a chunky kid with a cruel face, a miniature version of his Uncle Gary. "Mom! I'm hungry," he yelled, throwing his muddy backpack onto the table, right next to Joyce's plate. "Oh, my little prince," Cheryl cooed, her face transforming from witch to doting mother instantly. "Auntie Linda is making eggs. Sit down." Kyle looked at me and sneered. "I don't want eggs. I want pancakes. Make me pancakes, ugly." Joyce chuckled. "He knows what he wants. Go on, Linda. Make the boy pancakes." I looked at the carton of eggs. I looked at Penny, who was sitting on a stool in the corner, staring at the eggs with hunger in her eyes. "We don't have pancake mix," I said. "Then make it from scratch." Cheryl yelled. "God, you are useless." I cracked another egg into the pan. I wasn't going to make pancakes. I plated the eggs. Kyle ran over to the stove. "I said I want pancakes." He shoved Penny off her stool. It was casual, practiced violence. He just hip-checked her, and because she was so small and weak, she went flying. Penny hit the floor with a thud. She didn't cry out. She just curled into a ball, covering her head with her arms, waiting for the next blow. That broke me. That silence was louder than any scream. Cheryl didn't scold her son. She laughed. "Oops. Watch where you're going, Penny. You're so clumsy." "Yeah, clumsy," Kyle mocked, raising his foot to kick Penny while she was down. My vision went red. The soldier in me took over. The ant in me took over. I didn't think. I moved. I dropped the spatula. It clattered loudly on the stove. Kyle's foot was midair when I acted. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. I just stepped between them. This wasn't just a dysfunctional family. This was a cult of cruelty, and they were indoctrinating the next generation. They were teaching Kyle that hurting women was funny. They were teaching Penny that pain was her birthright. I looked at the three of them, the matriarch parasite, the sister parasite, and the larval parasite. They thought they were the kings of this jungle because they had broken a gentle soul. But they hadn't realized that the gentle soul had left the building. And something very, very different had taken her place. Kyle's sneaker was inches from Penny's ribs. It was a dirty, heavy sneaker, the kind that leaves a bruise that lasts for weeks. My hand shot out. It wasn't a swat or a push. It was a grapple. I caught Kyle's ankle in midair. My fingers, strengthened by years of handling recoil and subduing drunk recruits, locked around his leg like a steel trap. The room went dead silent. Kyle lost his balance, hopping on one foot, his eyes going wide. He tried to pull his leg back. He couldn't. I held him there, suspended, completely immobile. "Hey!" Kyle yelled, confusion clouding his bratty face. "Let go!" I didn't let go. I squeezed. Just a little. Just enough to press on the pressure point near the Achilles tendon. "Ow! Ow! Mom!" Kyle shrieked. Cheryl knocked her chair over, standing up. "What are you doing? Let go of him." She rushed at me, her hand raised to slap me. It was a reflex for her. She expected me to flinch, to drop her son and cower in the corner. I didn't flinch. With my left hand still holding Kyle's leg, I raised my right arm and caught Cheryl's wrist in midair. The sound of my palm slapping against her wrist bone was sharp and loud. Smack. Cheryl gasped. She stared at her trapped hand, then at me. Her eyes were bulging. She tried to yank her hand back, but I held fast. I had the mother in one hand and the son in the other. I looked Cheryl dead in the eye. I didn't yell. I lowered my voice to a terrifying, calm whisper. The kind of voice a drill sergeant uses right before he breaks you. If he touches her again, I said, my voice steady and cold, I will break this leg. And if you raise your hand to me again, I will break it off. You're hurting me. Cheryl stammered, fear replacing the arrogance in her eyes for the first time. Mom! Help! Joyce was sitting at the table, her mouth open, a piece of toast halfway to her lips. She looked stunned. Linda had never fought back. Not once in 10 years. I released them both simultaneously with a shove. Kyle stumbled back and fell on his butt, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. Cheryl clutched her wrist, rubbing the red mark that was already forming. You're crazy, Cheryl hissed, backing away. I'm telling Gary. Wait until Gary wakes up. He's going to kill you. Tell him, I said, turning back to the stove. I flipped the eggs onto a plate. Tell him to come down here. Breakfast is ready. I walked over to Penny, who was still on the floor, peeking out from behind her arms. I knelt down. The room was silent now, save for Kyle's sniffling. Get up, Penny, I said softly. She looked at me, trembling. Here. I placed the plate of steaming eggs and toast, the portion I had made for myself, in front of her. Eat. But. Uncle Gary. She whispered. Uncle Gary isn't eating this, I said loud enough for the parasites to hear. You are. Eat. Penny looked at the food, then at me, then at the stunned family. She took a bite, hurriedly, as if expecting the plate to be snatched away. I stood up and leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. I stared at Joyce. What are you looking at? I asked her. Joyce blinked. She looked at Cheryl, then back at me. She didn't know what to do with a Linda who had a spine. You've lost your mind, she muttered, returning to her coffee, though I noticed her hand was shaking slightly. They retreated. Cheryl grabbed Kyle and dragged him into the living room, whispering furiously. Joyce turned up the volume on the TV. They were confused. They didn't know how to handle resistance. They were bullies, and bullies are cowards at heart. But I knew this was just the opening skirmish. I had challenged the hierarchy. When Gary woke up, the real war would begin. I looked at my hands. They weren't shaking. They were steady. I felt a grim satisfaction. I wasn't just surviving this house. I was taking it over. The tension in the house was thick enough to choke on. Cheryl and Kyle stayed in their room most of the day, likely plotting or just hiding. Gary had grunted and left for the bar around noon without saying a word to me. Cheryl hadn't told him yet. She was probably saving it for when he was drunk and angry, to maximize the damage. Around 5 p.m., Joyce waddled into the kitchen. She threw a package of cheap ground beef on the counter. Make meatloaf, she commanded. And make it stretch. We need this to last 3 days. And don't use up all the spices, they're expensive. She peered at me over her glasses. And listen to me, you ungrateful girl. I want it dry and salty. Gary likes it salty. Last time you made it too bland. If I taste one bit of bland meat, you're sleeping outside. Salty, I repeated, keeping my face blank. You want it very salty. Yes. Salt is a preservative. Are you stupid as well as ugly? She turned and shuffled away. I looked at the beef. I looked at the canister of table salt on the counter. Malicious compliance, I thought. My favorite game. I mixed the meat. I didn't add breadcrumbs or eggs to soften it. I made it a dense brick of meat. And then, I opened the salt container. I didn't measure. I poured. A white waterfall of sodium cascaded into the bowl. I mixed it in. Then I added more. I added so much salt the meat felt gritty. I shoved it in the oven. 2 hours later, dinner was served. Gary was back. He was sitting at the head of the table, his face flushed from afternoon drinking. He was in a foul mood. Cheryl had clearly whispered in his ear, because he kept shooting me dirty looks, tapping his fork against the table like a ticking bomb. I hear you put your hands on my nephew today, Gary said, his voice low and dangerous. I placed the meatloaf in the center of the table. It was a dark, hard lump. He tripped, I said calmly. I caught him. Liar! Kyle shouted from across the table. She grabbed me. Shut up and eat, Gary growled. He was hungry. He cut a massive slice of the meatloaf and shoved it into his mouth. I watched. I waited. Gary chewed. He stopped chewing. His eyes watered. His face turned a shade of purple I hadn't seen before. He spat the chunk of meat onto his plate. Water, he choked. God! What is this? Poison? Joyce frowned. Oh, stop being dramatic, Gary. She took a bite of hers. Her reaction was immediate. She gagged, clutching her throat. Ack! It's pure salt. She glared at me. I told you to make it salty, not inedible. You did this on purpose. You wasteful, stupid. She picked up her plate, intending to throw the food at me. It was a move she had probably done a dozen times to Linda. But before she could launch it, I slammed my hand down on the table. Bang! The cutlery rattled. The glasses jumped. Put it down, I ordered. My voice wasn't loud, but it projected with the authority of a commanding officer. Joyce froze. Her arm hovered in midair. She looked at me, and for the first time, she saw the cold, dead look in my eyes. You said you wanted it salty, I said, walking slowly around the table toward her. You said salt is a preservative. You said you didn't want to waste money. I stopped behind her chair. I leaned down, bringing my face close to hers. She smelled of mothballs and bitterness. We don't waste food in this house, do we, Mother? I grabbed the spoon from her hand. I scooped up a large chunk of the salt rock meatloaf. Eat it. You, get away from me, Joyce stammered, leaning back. Gary started to stand up. Hey! Don't you touch her. I shot a look at Gary. Sit down, Gary. Unless you want to explain to the insurance company why you're driving a car with expired tags. I saw the notice in the mail. It was a bluff, mostly. I had seen a notice, but I didn't know if he was driving. But Gary froze. He had warrants, I could smell it on him. He sat back down, confused. I turned back to Joyce. I pressed the spoon against her lips. Open, I whispered. Terrified by the sudden shift in power, by the sheer audacity of this new Linda, Joyce opened her mouth. I shoved the spoon in. Chew, I commanded. Taste the savings. She chewed, tears streaming down her face, coughing as the salt burned her throat. Cheryl and Kyle watched in horror, their forks hovering halfway to their mouths. Swallow it, I said. She swallowed, gagging. Good, I said, straightening up and wiping my hands on a napkin. Now, nobody leaves this table until they finish their plates. I'm going to give Penny a bath. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving them sitting there in stunned silence, faced with their salty bricks of hate. I could feel their eyes boring into my back, but nobody moved. Nobody said a word. For the first time in years, Linda's tormentors were the ones suffering through dinner. The truce, if you could call it that, lasted exactly 3 hours. I was in the bedroom, Linda's old prison, folding some laundry. I heard the heavy, stumbling footsteps coming down the hall. They were angry footsteps. The door flew open. Gary stood there. He had clearly been drinking more since dinner. The liquid courage had finally overridden his confusion. He looked at me, swaying slightly, his eyes bloodshot and filled with hate. "You think you're smart?" he slurred. He unbuckled his leather belt. The sound of the leather sliding through the loops was a sharp zayap that usually signaled the beginning of pain for my sister. He wrapped the belt around his fist, leaving the heavy buckle swinging loose. Humiliating my mother, touching my nephew. He stepped into the room and kicked the door shut behind him. "I'm going to teach you a lesson, Linda. I'm going to beat you until you can't walk." I stopped folding the shirt in my hand. I placed it gently on the bed. I turned to face him. I didn't back away. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. "Put the belt down, Gary," I said calmly. He laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. "Or what? You'll cry? You'll call the cops? Go ahead. They know you're crazy. I told them you're off your meds." He lunged. It was a clumsy, drunk swing. He aimed the buckle at my face. He wanted to scar me. In his mind, he was fighting a 110-pound woman who had been conditioned to freeze. In reality, he was attacking a trained combatant. I stepped to the left. The buckle whistled past my ear, missing me by inches. Gary stumbled forward, carried by his own momentum. Before he could recover, I drove my knee into his stomach. Oof. The air rushed out of his lungs. He doubled over. But I wasn't done. This was for the broken ribs he gave Linda. I grabbed a handful of his greasy hair with my left hand and yanked his head up. With my right palm, I struck him hard under the chin. His head snapped back. He flailed, trying to grab me with his free hand. He was strong, fueled by adrenaline and rage, but he had no technique. He was a barroom brawler, I was a precision instrument. He swung the belt again, wildly. It caught my arm, stinging sharply, but I barely felt it through the adrenaline. I caught his wrist, the one holding the belt. I twisted. Hard. Against the joint. This is a move called a wrist lock. When applied with enough pressure, it forces the opponent to either go down or have their wrist snap. "Drop it," I hissed. "Ag. You bitch," he screamed. I applied more pressure. I stepped in close, using my hip for leverage. Crack. A sickening pop echoed in the small room. Gary screamed, a high-pitched wail of pure agony. The belt dropped from his nerveless fingers. He fell to his knees, clutching his broken wrist. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with shock. He couldn't process it. Linda was weak. Linda was nothing. How was she doing this? "My hand." "You broke my hand," he blubbered, snot running down his nose. I picked up the belt from the floor. I wrapped it around my hand, just like he had done. "Get up," I said. He scrambled backward, crab walking away from me until his back hit the wall. "No, stay away, who are you?" "I'm your wife," I said, my voice dripping with cold sarcasm. "I'm the woman you swore to love and cherish. Remember?" I cracked the belt in the air. Snap. He flinched, covering his face with his good arm. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, okay? Don't hit me. Sorry? I walked closer. You're not sorry, Gary. You're just hurt. There's a difference. I looked at him, cowering there. He looked pathetic. This was the monster? This was the man who had terrified my family for a decade? He was just a bully. And like all bullies, he folded the moment someone hit back. But I wasn't done. A broken wrist holds a pen, but it doesn't hold a memory. I needed to imprint fear into his DNA. I needed him to be so terrified of me that he would never look at Linda again without wetting himself. I reached down and grabbed him by the collar of his stained shirt. I hauled him up. He was heavy, dead weight, but I was fueled by 10 years of missed birthdays and unreturned phone calls. Where are we going? He whimpered. To the bathroom, I said. You look dirty, Gary. You need a wash. I dragged him out of the bedroom. Joyce and Cheryl were in the living room. They saw me dragging Gary, their big, strong Gary, by the collar while he cradled a broken arm and cried. They didn't move. They sat on the couch, frozen, mouths agape. They watched me drag him down the hall like a sack of garbage. I kicked the bathroom door open and shoved him inside. The bathroom was small, tiled and peeling pink ceramic. It smelled of mildew and cheap cologne, Gary's scent. Gary was huddled against the toilet, clutching his swelling wrist. Please, he sobbed. Please, Linda. I'm hurt. I need a doctor. I ignored him. I reached over and plugged the sink drain. I turned on the cold water tap. Full blast. The pipes groaned, and icy water began to fill the basin. You like water, don't you, Gary? I asked softly, watching the water rise. Linda told me you like to help her wash her hair. You like to hold her head under until she stops thrashing. Is that right? Gary's face went pale. I was just playing. It was a joke. A joke, I repeated. The water reached the brim. I turned off the tap. The silence in the bathroom was heavy. Let's laugh then, I said. I grabbed him by the back of his neck. He tried to fight, but with one broken hand and a body full of booze, he was useless. I slammed his chest against the porcelain rim of the sink. No! No, he gargled. I shoved his head down. Into the water. Bubbles exploded around his face. He thrashed. He kicked his legs, his boots squeaking against the tile floor. I held him there. I counted. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. 3 Mississippi. I pulled him up. He gasped, sucking in air, water streaming from his nose and mouth. His hair was plastered to his forehead. Is it funny yet? I asked. You're crazy, he screamed, coughing water. You're a psycho. Wrong answer. I shoved him back down. This time I held him longer. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. His thrashing became desperate. He was realizing that I could kill him right here, right now, and I wouldn't lose a wink of sleep over it. I pulled him up again. He was sputtering, his eyes rolling back slightly. He was crying openly now, mixing tears with the tap water. Please. He whispered. I'll do anything. Stop. I leaned in close to his wet ear. Who am I? He blinked, confused, water dripping from his eyelashes. You're Linda. Look at me, I commanded. He looked. He looked into my eyes. Really looked. And for the first time, I saw the dawn of realization. He saw the difference. He saw the predator staring back at him. You're not. He stammered. You're not her. No, I whispered. I'm the consequences. I let go of his neck. He slumped to the floor, coughing and retching. A dark stain spread across the front of his jeans. He had pissed himself. Look at you, I said, my voice full of disgust. The big man. The king of the castle. I opened the bathroom cabinet. I found a bottle of aspirin. I tossed it at him. It bounced off his chest. Take 2, I said. And if you come out of this bathroom before morning, I will break the other wrist. Do you understand? Yes, he wept. Yes. I turned and walked out. I found Joyce and Cheryl exactly where I had left them. They were huddled together on the sofa, terrified. They had heard the screaming. They had heard the splashing. And now they saw me emerging, dry, calm, and dangerous. I stopped in the middle of the living room. I smoothed down my shirt. Gary is taking a nap in the bathroom, I told them. He had a little accident. I looked at Cheryl. And Cheryl? If I hear Kyle bullying Penny one more time, I'm going to give him a bath too. Are we clear? Cheryl nodded frantically, unable to speak. Good night, I said. I walked to Penny's room, or rather, the closet they kept her in. I opened the door. She was awake, clutching her doll. She looked at me with wide eyes. Is the bad man gone? She whispered. I sat down on the floor next to her. He's still here, baby. But he's not the bad man anymore. He's just a scared little man. I stroked her hair. Go to sleep. Nobody is going to hurt you tonight. For the first time, Penny didn't flinch. She closed her eyes. I sat there in the dark, listening to the whimpering coming from the bathroom down the hall. I knew this wasn't over. Gary was a coward, but he was a vindictive one. Tomorrow, the shock would wear off, and he would try to find a way to hurt me. He would use money, or the law, or lies. But he didn't know one thing. While he was crying on the bathroom floor, I had already formulated the next phase of the plan. I wasn't just going to beat him up. I was going to take everything he had. The house, the money, the dignity. I was going to leave him with nothing but the memory of the water filling his lungs. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Gary was still barricaded in the bathroom, or maybe he had crawled back to bed when I wasn't looking. Joyce and Cheryl were avoiding me like I was a leper, whispering in corners and falling silent whenever I entered a room. I used this silence to my advantage. While Joyce was distracted by her soap operas and Cheryl was out picking up Kyle from school, God help the teachers, I slipped into the man cave. This was the small spare room Gary had claimed as his office. Linda was forbidden from entering. He claimed it was where he did important business. I picked the lock on the door with a bobby pin. It took me all of 4 seconds. Security wasn't exactly Fort Knox here. The room smelled of stale cigar smoke and failure. Piles of losing lottery tickets littered the floor. But I wasn't interested in his trash, I was interested in his secrets. I went straight for the filing cabinet in the corner. It was locked, but a quick leverage pop with a screwdriver solved that. I started flipping through the files. At first, it was just the usual signs of a deadbeat, unpaid credit card bills, letters from collection agencies, a court summons for a DUI he had hidden from Linda. But then I found the red folder. It was buried at the bottom underneath a stack of old nudie magazines. I opened it, and the air left my lungs. First, the mortgage papers. This house, the one Linda had bought with her inheritance, the one she owned free and clear before she married him? It was mortgaged to the hilt. Gary had forged her signature, a clumsy forgery, but good enough for a predatory lender, and taken out a massive loan against the equity. I looked at the dates. He had spent it all in 2 years. Where did the money go? I found the answer in the next stack: online gambling receipts. Crypto scams. Get-rich-quick seminars. He had blown through $200,000 of Linda's security while she was shopping with coupons to save 50 cents on peanut butter. My hands shook, not from fear, but from a cold, lethal rage. He wasn't just abusing her, he was systematically dismantling her future. But the next document was worse. Much worse. It was a life insurance policy. Taken out 6 months ago. The insured, Linda Davis. The beneficiary, Gary Davis. The payout, $1 million. And there was a highlighted clause: double indemnity for accidental death. I sat back in his cheap leather chair, staring at the paper. The bruises, the escalation in violence, the accidents he kept claiming she had, it all clicked into a terrifying picture. Gary wasn't just a violent drunk. He was a man running out of money, sitting on $1 million ticket that only paid out if his wife died. He wasn't beating her to discipline her anymore. He was working himself up to killing her. Maybe a fall down the stairs. Maybe a slip in the bathtub. You create a problem, you sell the solution, I whispered to the empty room. That's what con men do. I took out my phone, a burner I had brought with me, and photographed every single page. Every forgery, every bank statement showing the transfers to offshore gambling sites, and especially that insurance policy. I heard the front door open. Cheryl was back. I quickly shoved the papers back into the folder, put the folder back at the bottom of the stack, and relocked the cabinet. I slipped out of the room just as Cheryl's screeching voice filled the hallway. Mom! You won't believe what that teacher said to me about Kyle. I walked into the kitchen, my face a mask of calm. But inside, the mission had changed. This wasn't just about teaching a bully a lesson anymore. This was about survival. If I hadn't come last night, Linda would be dead within a month. I was sure of it. I looked at Penny, who was sitting at the table coloring. She looked up at me and gave a tiny, tentative smile. I smiled back, but my mind was racing. I needed legal firepower. I needed to nail Gary not just for assault, but for fraud, forgery, and attempted murder. I went to the bathroom, the only place with a lock, and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Mr. Henderson. He was my father's old lawyer, a man who treated the law like a holy scripture and had a soft spot for the twins. Mr. Henderson, I said when he picked up. This is Brenda. Don't hang up. I'm in trouble, and I have evidence of a crime. I spoke for 10 minutes. I told him everything. The switch. The abuse. The forged mortgage. The insurance policy. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, the old man's voice came through, shaking with anger. Brenda, get out of that house. Now. I can't, I said. Not yet. I need them to make a move. I need them to incriminate themselves so deeply they never see daylight again. Be careful, he warned. If he knows you know about the money, he'll become desperate. I'm counting on it, I said. Desperate men make mistakes. I hung up and flushed the toilet for cover. When I walked out, I saw Gary limping out of the bedroom. His arm was in a makeshift sling made from a dirty towel. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and hatred. I'm watching you, he hissed. Watch closely, Gary, I said, walking past him. You might learn something. They say you can't fight fire with fire because you'll just burn the house down. I disagree. Sometimes, you need a controlled burn to save the forest. And in this house, I was the arsonist. I knew I couldn't take them all on physically at once without risking Penny getting caught in the crossfire. I needed to divide and conquer. I needed to turn the pack of hyenas against each other. It started with Cheryl. Later that afternoon, I found her on the back porch, smoking a cigarette and scrolling through her phone. She glared at me as I stepped out with a basket of laundry. "What do you want, freak?" she spat. I started hanging clothes on the line. "Nothing," I said casually. "I was just surprised, is all." Cheryl narrowed her eyes. "Surprised by what?" I paused, holding up one of Joyce's oversized floral blouses. "Surprised that your mother still hasn't given you your share. You know, to help with Kyle." Cheryl lowered her phone. "What share?" "Mom doesn't have any money. She lives off Gary's disability checks." I laughed softly. "Oh, Cheryl. Is that what she tells you?" I moved closer, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Linda found it years ago. Why do you think Mom spends so much time in the basement?" "It's not to check the furnace." Cheryl was listening now. Greed is a powerful motivator, and Cheryl was the greediest person I knew. "What are you talking about?" "Dad's accident settlement," I lied smoothly. "The workers' comp payout. It was nearly $1 million. Mom hid it. She said she was saving it for a rainy day, but I think she just doesn't trust you with it. She thinks you'll waste it on, well, look at you." I let the insult hang there, knowing Cheryl's insecurity would latch onto it. "You're lying," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," I shrugged. "But have you ever noticed that heavy ceramic jar behind the old preserve shelves in the root cellar? The one she forbids anyone from touching?" I walked back inside, leaving Cheryl staring at the basement door with a look of hungry calculation. Phase 1, complete. Phase 2 was Joyce. I found the matriarch in the living room during a commercial break. Gary was passed out in the bedroom. The pain meds I gave him were actually just high-strength sleeping aids I had swapped into the aspirin bottle. "Joyce," I said, dusting the TV stand. "I think you should know. Gary is talking about the nursing home again." Joyce stiffened. "What? My Gary would never." "He was on the phone with the insurance agent," I lied. "He said that once he gets the payout, well, he said you're becoming a burden. He said Shady Pines has a room opening next month." Joyce's face went pale, then red. He said I was a burden?" "He said you eat too much and you're messy," I added, twisting the knife. "He wants the house to himself." "Well, for him and the new girlfriend." "Girlfriend?" Joyce shrieked. "Shoo," I hushed her. I shouldn't have said anything. "Just watch your back, Mom. He's not the loyal son you think he is." I walked away, hiding a smile. Paranoia is a slow-acting poison, and I had just injected a lethal dose into the family bloodstream. By dinner time, the atmosphere was toxic. Gary dragged himself to the table, groggy and in pain. "Mom, pass the salt," he grunted. "Get it yourself," Joyce snapped, clutching her purse to her chest like it contained gold bullion. "And don't think I don't know what you're planning, you ungrateful leech." Gary blinked, confused. "What? What are you talking about?" "And you?" Cheryl pointed a polished fingernail at Joyce. "Stop acting like a saint. I know what's in the basement. I know you're holding out on me. You stay out of my basement." Joyce yelled, slamming her hand on the table. "Both of you shut up." Gary roared, wincing as his voice strained his broken ribs, which I assumed he had, based on how he was holding his side. "My head is splitting. Maybe you should go to your girlfriend for an aspirin." Joyce yelled back. It was chaos. Beautiful, orchestrated chaos. They were screaming, accusing, and looking at each other with pure hatred. They weren't looking at me. They weren't looking at Penny. I quietly prepared a plate of sandwiches, fresh turkey and cheese I had bought with money I stole from Gary's wallet while he slept, and took Penny into the living room. "Eat up, sweetie," I whispered, turning on the TV to a cartoon to drown out the shouting from the kitchen. "Why are they fighting?" Penny asked, her eyes wide. Because they are bad people, Penny, I said, stroking her hair. And bad people always end up eating each other. I watched them from the doorway. They were distracted. They were divided. But I knew this distraction wouldn't last forever. Eventually, their survival instinct would kick in, and they would realize the common denominator in all this new misery was me. I needed to be ready for when they reunited. Because when they did, they would come for me with everything they had. The shouting match in the kitchen eventually died down, replaced by a sullen, brooding silence. But the seeds of suspicion had been planted deep. Joyce watched Gary with narrowed eyes, clutching her purse. Cheryl watched Joyce, glancing repeatedly toward the basement door. Gary just watched me, his gaze filled with a mixture of fear and calculating malice. He wasn't stupid. He knew I wasn't the Linda he had broken. He knew I was a threat. And a threat to a man like Gary needed to be eliminated. The next afternoon, the house was suspiciously quiet. I had sent Penny to play in the backyard. I had fixed the latch on the gate so she couldn't get out, but nobody could get in without me knowing. I was in the hallway, pretending to sweep, when I heard the whispers coming from Joyce's bedroom. The door was cracked open an inch. I stopped sweeping. I pulled out my phone and activated the baby monitor app. I had hidden the receiver unit under Joyce's bed that morning while looking for a lost sock. I put in my earbuds and listened. She knows, Gary's voice was a low growl. I don't know how, but she knows about the money. She asked me about the insurance yesterday. It's not Linda, Joyce whispered, her voice trembling. I'm telling you, Gary. Look at her eyes. That's not the girl who cried when she broke a plate. That's something else. Maybe she's possessed. She's not possessed, Mom, she's crazy. Cheryl hissed. She probably stopped taking those antidepressants you force-fed her and now she's having a psychotic break. It doesn't matter what she is, Gary said. She's dangerous. She broke my wrist, Mom. She almost drowned me. If we don't do something, she's going to kill us in our sleep. So what do we do? Cheryl asked. Call the cops? No cops, Gary said quickly. If the cops come, they start asking questions. They look at the house. They look at the business. He meant the fraud. We handle this ourselves, Gary continued. Tonight. We give her the special soup. You know the one, Mom. The one with the crushed Valium. A heavy dose? Joyce asked. Enough to knock out a horse, Gary said. When she's out, we tie her up. Tight. Then we call Crestwood Asylum. We tell them she escaped. Or better yet, we tell them she tried to kill us. We show them the bruises on me. Genius, Cheryl giggled. We paint her as the violent lunatic. They lock her away forever. And you get power of attorney over the house. Exactly, Gary said. And once she's locked up, well, accidents happen in those places all the time. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty hallway. They weren't just planning to commit me. They were planning to erase me. But what about the kid? Cheryl asked. Penny saw her beat you up. Penny does what she's told, Gary grunted. Or else. I took out the earbuds. My hand gripped the broom handle so tight I thought it might snap. So that was the play. Drug me, bind me, frame me. It was a classic, cowardly move. I walked back to the kitchen, my mind racing. I had a few hours before dinner. I needed to prep the battlefield. First, Penny. She couldn't be here tonight. It was going to get violent. I went to the backyard. Penny, sweetie, I said, keeping my voice light. How would you like to have a sleepover? Penny looked up. A sleepover? Yes. Mrs. Gable next door. She has that nice golden retriever you like. I talked to her this morning. She said she'd love to have you over for pizza and movies. Mrs. Gable was a sweet, retired widow who suspected something was wrong in this house but was too afraid to interfere. I had spoken to her over the fence earlier, flashing my concerned sister's smile, and asked if she could watch my niece for a night because Gary was having a mood. She had agreed instantly. Pizza? Penny's eyes lit up. Go pack your bag, I said. Quickly. Before the trolls come out. Once Penny was safely across the fence, I returned to the house. I felt lighter, but also sharper. With the innocent bystander gone, I didn't have to hold back. I went to the fuse box in the basement. I loosened the main fuse just enough that a hard stomp on the floor above would jar it loose and kill the lights. I went to my room and prepared my weapons. A can of hairspray and a lighter. A sock filled with quarters, old school, but effective. And my phone, fully charged, with the cloud backup on. I walked into the kitchen. Joyce was humming as she chopped carrots. She looked at me and smiled, a sickly, fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. Linda, dear, she said. Why don't you go rest? You look tired. I'm making your favorite tonight. Chicken soup. That sounds lovely, Mom, I said, returning the fake smile. I'm dying for some soup. You have no idea, I thought. Bring it on. Dinner time arrived with the punctuality of an execution. The table was set. Joyce had actually put out a tablecloth, likely to hide the stains from last night's salt fiasco. Gary was there, his arm in a fresh sling, looking smug. Cheryl was texting, trying to look bored but failing to hide her anticipation. Joyce brought out the tureen of soup. It smelled good, garlic, rosemary, and betrayal. She ladled a bowl for Gary, then Cheryl, then herself. Finally, she scooped a massive portion for me. She made a show of stirring it, likely ensuring the powder was well mixed. Here you go, Linda, she cooed. Eat up. It'll make you feel better. Where's Penny? Gary asked, looking around suspiciously. She's sleeping, I lied. She had a tummy ache. I told her to stay in bed. Good, Gary grunted. Less noise. I looked at the soup. It was steaming. I stirred it with my spoon. I could see tiny white specks floating in the broth that hadn't quite dissolved. Amateurs. Thank you, Mom, I said. You know, this reminds me of the soup you made when I first moved in. Do you remember? Joyce blinked. Yes, of course. You told me that family takes care of family, I said, locking eyes with her. That was before you started hiding money in the basement, wasn't it? The spoon halfway to her mouth froze. I don't know what you're talking about. And Gary, I turned to him. This soup, is it the last meal? You know, like they give prisoners before the electric chair? Gary choked on his water. You're talking crazy again. Just eat the damn soup. I will, I said. But first. I lifted the bowl. I brought it to my lips. Their eyes were glued to me. They were holding their breath. They were so desperate for me to drink the poison that they leaned forward. I smiled. Oops. I dropped the bowl. It wasn't a slip. I threw it. Crash. The ceramic shattered on the floor. Hot soup splattered everywhere, onto the table legs, onto the floor, and crucially, onto Cheryl's bare feet. Ah! You stupid bitch! Cheryl screamed, jumping up and shaking her burning foot. Oh no! I stood up, feigning horror. I am so clumsy. I'm so sorry. Here, let me help. I grabbed the pitcher of ice water from the center of the table and tripped, throwing the entire contents into Gary's face. Gary sputtered, gasping as the ice water hit him. He jumped up, knocking his chair over. "You did that on purpose." "I'm shaking," I cried, holding up my hands. "It's my nerves. You guys make me so nervous." I looked down at the puddle of soup on the floor. "You know," I said, my voice dropping the hysterical act instantly. "It's a shame. That looked delicious. But I bet it would have made me very sleepy." The room went dead silent. Gary wiped the water from his eyes. He looked at me, and he knew. He knew I knew. "You," he growled. The pretense was over. "Grab her." "Now?" Cheryl yelled. "My foot is burning." "Just grab her," Gary roared. He lunged across the table with his good arm. I stepped back, easily dodging his clumsy grasp. I grabbed the carving knife from the meat platter. I tooted, pointing the blade at them. "Table manners, Gary." They froze. "A knife changes the equation. You want to play rough?" I asked, backing toward the hallway. "Fine. Let's play. But not at the dinner table." I turned and ran. Not out the front door, that was locked, and they would catch me in the yard. I ran toward the bedrooms. "Get the rope!" Gary screamed to his mother. "Don't let her lock herself in." I heard them scrambling. The hunt was on. I dashed into the master bedroom, their territory, and slammed the door. I didn't lock it. Locking it would just delay them. I needed them to come in. I needed them on my ground. I stood in the center of the room. I took a deep breath. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of combat. "Come on," I whispered. "Come and get it." The sun had set an hour ago. Outside, the world was dark. Inside, the only light came from the hallway bulb, casting long, distorted shadows under the bedroom door. I could hear them outside. They were regrouping. "She's got a knife, Gary," Cheryl whispered. "She's a girl," Gary scoffed, though his voice wavered. "She's scared. We go in together." "Mom, you throw the blanket over her head." "Cheryl, you grab her legs." "I'll knock the knife out of her hand." "Why do I have to grab the legs?" Cheryl whined. "Just do it." I smiled in the darkness. Their plan was crude. It relied on overwhelming force. But they were assuming I was cornered prey. They didn't realize I was the trap. I tossed the knife onto the bed. I didn't need it. A knife is a lethal weapon, and I didn't want to kill them. I wanted to destroy them. Plus, using a knife would ruin my self-defense claim later. I picked up the can of hairspray and the lighter. A makeshift flamethrower. Good for shock value. Then, I stomped my foot hard on the floorboards, right above the spot where the basement fuse box was loose. Pop. The hallway light flickered and died. The entire house plunged into absolute darkness. "What the hell?" Gary yelled. "Mom, did you pay the bill?" "Of course I did," Joyce shrieked. "It's that old fuse. I can't see anything," Cheryl cried. "Perfect." I moved silently to the corner of the room, behind the heavy oak wardrobe. My breathing was shallow and controlled. I became part of the shadows. The door handle turned slowly. "Linda?" Gary's voice called out. "Stop playing games. The power is out. Come out and we won't hurt you." "Liar." The door creaked open. 3 silhouettes appeared in the doorway, backlit only by the faint moonlight coming from the living room window down the hall. They stepped in, huddled together like a pack of nervous wolves. "Where is she?" Cheryl whispered. "Probably under the bed," Joyce hissed. "She always hides under the bed." They moved toward the bed. I watched them pass me. Gary was in the lead, holding a baseball bat. Joyce had a heavy wool blanket. Cheryl held a roll of duct tape. They reached the bed. Joyce threw the blanket over the pillows, thinking my shape was under the duvet. "Got her!" Joyce yelled. She dove onto the bed, pinning the pillows. "Hold her down!" Gary shouted, raising the bat. Smack. He brought the bat down on the mattress. "Wait! There's nobody here!" Joyce screamed, realizing she was wrestling a feather pillow. "What?" Gary paused. "Surprise," I whispered from behind them. I flicked the lighter. A small flame danced in the dark. Then I pressed the nozzle of the hairspray. Whoosh. A 3-foot-10 of fire roared across the room, illuminating their terrified faces in a flash of orange light. I aimed it above their heads, just to scare them, not to burn them. "Fire! She's burning the house down!" Cheryl screamed, diving to the floor. Gary stumbled back, tripping over his mother who was still on the bed. I let the flame die. Darkness returned, but now they were blind, panicked, and disoriented. I moved. I grabbed Cheryl by her hair as she tried to crawl away. I spun her around and shoved her into the open closet. "Stay," I ordered. I slammed the closet door and jammed a chair under the handle before she could react. "Let me out!" Cheryl banged on the door. "One down." "She's over there," Gary yelled, swinging the bat blindly in the dark. "I'll kill you." He swung hard. The bat hit the wardrobe with a deafening crack. The vibration must have stung his hands. I stayed low. I swept my leg out. Gary took a step and tripped over my leg. He crashed to the floor, face planting onto the rug. I was on him in a second. I put my knee in the center of his back, right on his spine. I grabbed his broken wrist. "Arg!" he screamed. "Drop the bat," I whispered. He dropped it. Joyce was scrambling off the bed, trying to run for the door. "Don't leave me, Mom," Gary begged. "Every man for himself," Joyce yelled, waddling toward the exit. I didn't stop her. I wanted her out. I needed her out for the next part of the plan. I pulled a zip tie from my pocket. I had bought a pack at the hardware store yesterday. I yanked Gary's good arm behind his back and zipped it to his belt loop. Then I did the same with the broken arm, carefully but firmly. He was hogtied on the floor. "You're dead," he panted, his face pressed into the carpet. "When I get loose, you're dead." "You're not getting loose, Gary," I said, standing up. "And I'm not Linda." I walked to the door. I could hear Joyce hyperventilating in the hallway. "Time for the grand finale," I muttered. With Gary secured and Cheryl banging uselessly inside the closet, I had control of the master bedroom. But the game wasn't won yet. I needed them to destroy each other. I needed evidence that was undeniable. I dragged Gary, he was heavy, but adrenaline makes you strong, and heaved him onto the bed. "What are you doing?" he spat. "Making you comfortable," I said. I took the duct tape he had brought. I taped his ankles together. Then I taped his mouth shut. He writhed, his eyes bulging, making muffled noises of protest. "MMPH. MMPH. Shoo," I patted his cheek. "You talk too much." I took the blanket Joyce had brought and threw it over him, covering him completely except for his feet. In the dark, he just looked like a wriggling lump on the bed. Then, I unlocked the closet. Cheryl tumbled out, gasping for air. Don't burn me. Don't burn me. Get out. I screamed, feigning terror. He's crazy. Run. Cheryl, confused and terrified, scrambled out of the room on all fours. I followed her into the hallway. Joyce was cowering in the kitchen doorway, holding a heavy frying pan she must have grabbed for protection. Mom! Cheryl cried, running to her. She tried to burn me alive. I ran toward them, putting on the performance of a lifetime. I let my hair fall messily over my face. I made my hands shake. I forced tears into my eyes. Help me! I screamed, grabbing Joyce's arm. Please, Mom. Help! Gary snapped. Joyce pushed me away. Get off me! Where is my son? He's in the bedroom. I wailed, pointing back to the dark room. He tried to tie me up. He tied himself up. He's screaming that he's going to kill us all. He has the knife. He said he's going to cut our throats while we sleep. What? Joyce blinked. He tied himself up? He's having a psychotic break. I yelled. He's thrashing around on the bed. He thinks he's Houdini. He said if he gets loose, he's burning the house down with us inside. It was a ridiculous story. But fear makes people stupid. And they already believed Linda was crazy. Why wouldn't Gary be crazy too? Especially after the way he had been acting, paranoid about the money, fighting with them. He's going to burn the money. I whispered, dropping the magic word. He said he's going to burn the basement money. That did it. Joyce's eyes went wide. My money? He's on the bed right now. I pointed. He's trying to get the lighter. We have to stop him. Joyce looked at Cheryl. Cheryl looked at the frying pan in Joyce's hand. Then Cheryl grabbed the broom from the corner. We have to knock him out, Cheryl said, her greed overriding her fear. Before he burns the cash. Let's get him, Joyce growled. The two women, armed with kitchen implements and fueled by the fear of losing their inheritance, marched toward the dark bedroom. I followed them, pulling out my phone. I tapped the screen. Video record. Flash on. Be careful. I called out from behind them. He's dangerous. They rushed into the room. Gary! Joyce yelled at the lump on the bed. Stop it right now. Gary, hearing his mother's voice, writhed frantically under the blanket, trying to scream through the tape. MMMPH. MMMPH. He's trying to get up. Cheryl shrieked. Hit him, Mom. And then, the unthinkable happened. Joyce raised the frying pan. You ungrateful brat. Don't you touch my money. Clang. She brought the cast iron pan down on the lump. Gary let out a muffled scream of agony that vibrated through the mattress. He's still moving. Cheryl yelled. She swung the broom handle like a club. Thwack. It connected with the side of the lump, right where Gary's broken ribs were. I stood in the doorway, phone raised, recording every second. Stay down. Joyce screamed, hitting him again. Stay down. It was a frenzy. Years of resentment, greed, and dysfunction were being unleashed on that bed. They weren't hitting an intruder, they were hitting the source of their frustration. They were hitting the man who threatened their money. Harder! Cheryl yelled. Knock him out! Gary's struggles became weaker. He stopped thrashing. He just lay there, taking the blows, sobbing behind the tape. I think you got him, I said calmly from the doorway. I tapped the screen to stop the recording. Then, I reached out and flipped the light switch. I had quietly kicked the fuse box back into place on my way past the basement door earlier. The lights flickered on. The room was flooded with harsh, yellow light. Joyce stood there, panting, the frying pan raised. Cheryl was mid-swing with the broom. They looked at the bed. The blanket had slipped off during the beating. They stared. They blinked. Staring back at them, battered, bruised, taped up, and bleeding from a gash on his forehead, was Gary. His eyes were wide with betrayal and pain. Joyce dropped the pan. It hit the floor with a dull thud. "Gary," she whispered. The silence in that room was heavier than lead. Joyce stared at her son. Cheryl stared at her brother. Gary stared at the ceiling, tears leaking from the corners of his eyes, soaking into the duct tape over his mouth. "Oh my God," Cheryl breathed. We killed him." "He's not dead," I said, stepping into the room. "But he's definitely not happy." Joyce spun around to face me. You said he was crazy. You said he was trying to burn the money." "I lied," I said, leaning against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "Just like you lied about loving Linda. Just like you lied about the money. Just like you lied to the police about her accidents. You tricked us." Cheryl screamed, raising the broom again. "You set us up." I asked for help, I corrected her cold-bloodedly. "I told you there was a dangerous man on the bed. I didn't tell you to beat him with a frying pan. You did that all on your own. You didn't even check who it was. You just wanted to hurt someone." I held up my phone. The screen was glowing. "And now," I said, "I have it all in 4K resolution. Assault with a deadly weapon. Conspiracy. Domestic violence. And let's not forget the attempted unlawful imprisonment you were planning for me tonight." Joyce's face went from red to a terrifying shade of gray. She clutched her chest. "Give me that phone." "No," I said. "I've already uploaded it to the cloud. And I sent a copy to my lawyer, Mr. Henderson. He's probably watching it right now with a bucket of popcorn." "Mom, do something," Cheryl cried. Joyce looked at Gary, moaning on the bed. She looked at me. Then, her self-preservation instinct kicked in, the only instinct stronger than her greed. It was self-defense. Joyce yelled. He was attacking us." "He was tied up, Joyce," I pointed out. "Hand and foot. Gagged. A jury is going to love this. Mother and sister beat helpless disabled man, it's headline news." I walked over to the bed. I ripped the tape off Gary's mouth. "Ryup." "Ag." Gary screamed. You witches. You tried to kill me. It was her fault." Joyce pointed a shaking finger at me. "She tricked us. You hit me with a frying pan, Mom." Gary sobbed. "I saw you. You looked me in the eye and you hit me. I thought you were burning the money." Joyce blurted out. "The money?" Gary's face twisted. "You beat me over the money? There is no money," Cheryl shouted. "She lied about that too." "Actually," I interrupted. "That part might be true. But we'll get to that later." I looked at the three of them. Broken, turning on each other, pathetic. "Now," I said, pulling up the dial pad on my phone. "I'm going to do what a responsible citizen does. I'm going to call the police." "No!" Joyce lunged at me. I sidestepped her easily. She crashed into the wall. 911, I spoke into the phone as it connected. "Yes, I need police and an ambulance immediately. 422, Oak Street. There's been a violent domestic assault." My husband has been beaten by his mother and sister. Yes, weapons were used. Please hurry. I hung up. You're done, Cheryl hissed. When the cops get here, we'll tell them you did it. It's 3 against 1. Is it? I asked. I have the video, Cheryl. The video doesn't lie. And look at Gary. Who tied him up? You brought the rope. Your fingerprints are on the duct tape. I turned to Gary. Are you going to lie for them, Gary? After Mommy Dearest cracked your skull open for a pile of cash? Gary looked at his mother. The betrayal in his eyes was absolute. No, Gary croaked. No. I'm pressing charges. Gary! Joyce shrieked. I'm your mother. You're a monster. Gary yelled. I smiled. The pack had officially eaten itself. I walked out of the room, leaving them to their misery. I went to the front porch and sat on the swing. Ideally, I should have felt exhausted. But I felt energized. The night air was cool. I could hear sirens in the distance, getting louder. The justice train was coming, and I was the conductor. The sirens wailed closer, blue and red lights bouncing off the neighbors' houses. Mrs. Gable peeked out from her window next door. I gave her a small wave. Penny was safe. That was all that mattered. Inside the house, the shouting had turned to sobbing. Joyce was wailing about her heart condition. Cheryl was trying to wipe her fingerprints off the broom handle, too little, too late. Gary was just moaning. I sat on the porch swing, watching the flashing lights turn the corner. It was funny. 10 years ago, I left this town feeling like a coward. Tonight, I sat here feeling like a god of vengeance. I looked at the video on my phone one last time. The image of Joyce's face, twisted in greed and rage as she swung that pan, was etched into the screen. It was ugly. It was raw. But it was the truth. And that's the thing about truth. It's like water. You can try to hold it back, you can try to drown it, but eventually, it finds the cracks. It breaks the dam. Those women in there, they didn't just hit Gary. They were hitting their own reflection. They were hitting the ugly life they had built on lies and abuse. And Gary? He was being consumed by the very violence he had cultivated. It was poetic. The first cruiser screeched to a halt in front of the house. Officer Miller stepped out. I knew him. He was a rookie when I left, but now he had gray at his temples. He looked at me sitting calmly on the porch. Mrs. Davis? He asked, hand resting on his belt. It's Ms. Davis, I said, standing up. But you can call me Brenda. Linda is, resting. The look of confusion on his face was priceless. But I had plenty of time to explain. I watched as the paramedics rushed past me into the house. I watched as Officer Miller called for backup. And then, I watched the finale. Joyce came out first, strapped to a gurney, an oxygen mask on her face, a drama queen to the end. But there was a cop beside her, reading her rights. Then Cheryl, in handcuffs, screaming obscenities at the neighbors who had gathered to watch. And finally, Gary. Broken, bloody, strapped down, looking at me with eyes that held no more arrogance, only fear. As the ambulance doors closed on the family from hell, I held up my phone. The screen showed the video paused right at the moment of impact. You know, seeing that look on Joyce's face when the lights came on, that sheer terror of realizing she had destroyed her own golden boy, it was the most satisfying moment of my life. Karma doesn't always have a menu, but tonight, she served exactly what they ordered. If you've made it this far with me, listening to this nightmare unfold, I need you to do something for me. Please hit that like button and comment the number 1 below. Why number 1? Because one person can make a difference. One person can stand up to a whole family of bullies. And by commenting one, you're telling me that you're standing with Linda, with Penny, and with every woman who has ever had to fight back. Your support means the world to me. It tells me I'm not shouting into the void. So please, drop a 1 in the comments so I can see you, thank you, and know we're in this together. Now, are you ready to hear how I made them pay every single penny they stole? Because the violence was over, but the financial war was just beginning. And believe me, I'm even better at math than I am at fighting. The front lawn was a circus. Blue lights, red lights, static from police radios, and the murmurs of neighbors who had been waiting years for this house to explode. Officer Miller approached me, notepad in hand. He looked tired. Okay, let me get this straight, he said, clicking his pen. You are Brenda Davis, Linda's twin. You've been impersonating her for how long? 2 days, I said. Since she showed up at my door half dead. I handed him the folder I had prepared, copies of Linda's medical records from the hospital, the photos of her bruises, and the video of tonight's assault. I came here to protect her, I said. I didn't lay a hand on them tonight, officer. They turned on each other. Miller watched the video on my phone. He winced when the frying pan connected. He watched it twice. This is distinct, he muttered. Assault with a deadly weapon. Domestic violence. And conspiracy, I added. Listen to the audio at the beginning. They talk about tying her up. They meant me. They were planning to kidnap and assault me. Miller nodded slowly. He looked at the house. We've had calls here before. Noise complaints. Shouting. But Linda never pressed charges. Linda was afraid, I said. I'm not. We're going to need a statement, Miller said. A long one. And we'll need to verify Linda's location. She's at Columbus General, I said. Room 402. Just then, Cheryl was being shoved into the back of a cruiser. She saw me. She's lying. Cheryl screamed, her face pressed against the window. She's the crazy one. She tricked us. I waved at her. A small, polite wave. Miller sighed. Looks like we have enough to hold them for now. Gary is going to the hospital under guard. The women are going to county. Good, I said. Officer, there's one more thing. My niece, Penny. She's next door. I have temporary custody papers drawn up by my lawyer. Mr. Henderson worked fast. We'll need to call Child Protective Services to verify, Miller said. Do it, I said. But do not let that woman, I pointed at Cheryl, near her. Not a chance, Miller said. I watched the cars drive away. The silence that followed was heavy, but clean. The air felt different. The smell of stale beer and fear was gone, replaced by the crisp night air. I went next door to Mrs. Gable's. Penny was asleep on the sofa, clutching her doll. Mrs. Gable looked at me with wide eyes. Is it over? She whispered. The bad part is, I said. Thank you for watching her. I saw them take Joyce, Mrs. Gable said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. That woman, she kicked my cat once. I knew she was evil. I picked Penny up. She stirred but didn't wake. She felt safe in my arms. I carried her back to the house. It was empty now. Truly empty. I laid Penny in the master bedroom, on the clean side of the bed. I wasn't going to put her back in that closet. I sat in the living room, listening to the quiet. I should have slept. But I couldn't. My mind was racing. Locking them up was good. But jail is temporary. They would make bail. They would get lawyers. They would come back. I needed to make sure they had nothing to come back to. I took out the documents I had stolen from Gary's office. The mortgage. The insurance. And I thought about the lie I told Cheryl. The lie about the money in the basement. Was it a lie? Linda had mentioned years ago, before the silence, that Joyce was paranoid about banks. That she didn't trust the government. That when Dad's settlement money came through, Joyce acted weird. I stood up. I walked to the kitchen. I looked at the basement door. The police had cleared the scene, but they hadn't searched the house. Not yet. I turned the handle. The door creaked open, revealing the dark stairs descending into the earth. If there was money down there, it didn't belong to Joyce. It belonged to the family she destroyed. It belonged to Linda. I grabbed a flashlight. "Let's go treasure hunting," I whispered. The next morning, I left Penny with a social worker Mr. Henderson had arranged, a kind woman named Sarah who assured me Penny would be safe, and drove to the hospital where Gary was being held. He was in a secure ward. His injuries were severe: concussion, broken ribs, courtesy of the broom, and a fractured wrist, courtesy of me. He looked like a mummy, wrapped in bandages, handcuffed to the bedrail. The guard at the door stopped me. "Family only." "I'm his wife," I said, flashing Linda's ID. "I need to speak to him about legal representation." The guard checked the ID, looked at my face, no makeup, looking tired, and nodded. 5 minutes. "He's heavily sedated." I walked in. The room smelled of antiseptic and misery. Gary's eyes were closed. His breathing was raspy. I pulled a chair right up to the bed. I didn't sit. I leaned over him. "Gary," I whispered. His eyes fluttered open. They were hazy at first, then they focused. When he saw me, he flinched, rattling the handcuffs. "You," he croaked. "You put me here." "No, Gary," I said softly. "Your mother put you here. With a frying pan. Remember?" He closed his eyes, a tear leaking out. The memory was clearly painful. "I want a lawyer," he mumbled. "I'm going to sue you. I'm going to sue everyone." "With what money?" I asked. "I found the mortgage papers, Gary. I know the house is underwater. I know you spent every dime of Linda's inheritance." His eyes snapped open. Fear replaced the anger. "And," I continued, leaning closer so my lips were inches from his ear, "I found the life insurance policy. The one with the double indemnity clause." Gary stopped breathing for a second. "Attempted murder," I whispered. "Insurance fraud. That's 20 years, Gary. Minimum. Plus the assault charges. Plus the child abuse." "I never touched the kid," he lied. "I have video of Kyle kicking her while you laughed," I bluffed. "And Linda, the real Linda, she's awake. She's talking to the police right now. She's telling them about the time you held her head underwater. The time you threw her down the stairs." Gary began to shake. The machine monitoring his heart rate started to beep faster. Beep, 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 beep. "Who are you?" he wheezed. "You're not Linda. You're a demon." "I'm Brenda," I said, dropping the act. "I'm the sister you thought you chased away." Surprise. "Brenda." He breathed. "The soldier." "The military police," I corrected. "I hunt garbage like you for a living." I pulled a document out of my bag. It was a divorce settlement Mr. Henderson had drafted overnight. "Here is the deal," I said, placing the paper on his chest. "You sign this. It grants Linda full custody of Penny. It signs over the house, what's left of it, to her. And you plead guilty to the assault charges. You take the fall. You leave Linda out of it. Why would I do that? He spat. Because if you don't, I said, I hand over the insurance papers to the fraud division. And I tell the police about the accidents you planned. You'll go to federal prison, Gary. You know what they do to wife beaters and child abusers in federal prison? I let the question hang there. But if you sign, I continued, I lose the insurance papers. You go to jail for assault, maybe do 2 years with good behavior. You get out. You start over. Far away from us. It was a generous offer. Too generous. But I just wanted him gone. I wanted Linda to be free. Gary looked at the ceiling. He looked at his handcuffed wrist. He realized he was checkmated. I can't sign, he whispered. My hands are broken. I'll help you, I said. I put a pen in his swollen fingers. I held the clipboard. He signed. It was a shaky scrawl, but it was legal. One more thing, I said, tucking the paper into my bag. Your mother. She has money, doesn't she? Gary laughed bitterly. Mom? She's broke. She mooches off me. That's what she wants you to think, I said. I found something in the basement last night. Gary frowned. What? I'm going to visit her next, I said. I wonder if she'll be as cooperative as you. I turned to leave. Wait, Gary called out. What did you find? I smiled over my shoulder. Ask her yourself at the trial. I walked out. 1 down. 2 to go. County jail is a depressing place, smelling of industrial cleaner and despair. I sat in the visitation room, separated from Joyce and Cheryl by a thick glass partition. They were brought in wearing orange jumpsuits. Cheryl looked like she had been crying for hours, her makeup was gone, revealing a sallow, mean face. Joyce looked furious. They sat down. They picked up the phones. You witch! Joyce screamed into the receiver. Get me out of here! I have a heart condition. You should have thought about that before you played whack-a-mole with your son's head, I said calmly. It was a mistake. Cheryl yelled. We thought he was you. That's not a defense, Cheryl, I said. That's premeditation. What do you want? Joyce snapped. You came here to gloat? I came here to make a trade, I said. I looked around to make sure the guards weren't listening too closely. I found the jar, Joyce. Joyce went absolutely still. Her eyes, usually darting around, locked onto mine. What jar? The ceramic pickling jar, I said. Behind the old shelf in the root cellar. The one buried under the dirt floor. I hadn't actually found it buried, I had just found a loose stone and a hollow sound. But her reaction told me I had hit the bullseye. You stayed up all night digging, didn't you? I guessed. Or maybe you just moved it there recently. You stay away from my house. Joyce hissed. It's not your house, I said. It's Linda's house. Gary signed it over this morning. He what? Cheryl gasped. He can't do that. We live there. Not anymore, I said. But let's talk about the jar. I opened it. It's full of cash. Hundreds. Old bills. Must be, what? 200,000? Free? Joyce's face turned purple. That's mine. That's my husband's money. It was for the family. Cheryl yelled, turning on her mother. You said there was no settlement. You let me live in poverty while you were sitting on a gold mine? Shut up, you idiot. Joyce snapped at Cheryl. No, you shut up. Cheryl slammed her fist against the glass. I couldn't pay for Kyle's braces. I'm driving a car with no brakes. And you have a jar of cash? It was for my retirement. Joyce screamed. It was stolen. I interrupted. It was hidden assets. That's fraud, Joyce. If I tell the IRS, well, you'll never see the outside of a cell. Joyce looked trapped. She looked at Cheryl, who was looking at her with murderous intent. She looked at me. What do you want? She whispered again. I want you to plead guilty, I said. To everything. You take the rap for the assault. You admit you were the ringleader. You exonerate Linda completely. And you agree to a restraining order. You never come near Linda or Penny again. And the money? Joyce asked, her voice trembling. If you sign the plea deal, I said, I won't report the money to the IRS. You can use it to pay for your lawyers. God knows you'll need good ones. It was a lie. I had already handed the jar, which contained $85,000, not $300, to Mr. Henderson to be put into a trust for Penny. He was going to file it as found assets during the divorce. Joyce would never see a dime. But she didn't know that. Fine, Joyce spat. I'll sign. But if you touch that money, I won't spend it, I promised. True. Penny would. I hate you, Cheryl said. I hope you die. Get in line, I said. But hey, look on the bright side. You won't have to cook for a while. I hung up the phone. I watched them as I walked away. They were already arguing again. Cheryl was screaming at Joyce about the money. Joyce was screaming back. The guards were moving in to separate them. They would destroy each other. Gary would hate his mother for hiding the money. Cheryl would hate her mother for hoarding it. Joyce would hate them both for betraying her. The family bond was broken. Not by me, but by the truth. I walked out into the sunlight. I took a deep breath. It was over. The house was ours. The divorce was signed. The monsters were in cages. I got into my truck and drove to the hospital. Not to see Gary. To see Linda. The room at Columbus General was bright. Linda was sitting up in bed, looking at the view outside. The swelling in her eye had gone down, turning a yellowish green. Her ribs were still taped, but she was smiling. Real smiling. Not the fake, terrified smile she used to wear. Brenda, she said when I walked in. I sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. Her real hand. Not a broken copy. It's done, I said. I told her everything. The arrests. The video. The divorce papers. The money in the jar. She listened in silence, tears streaming down her face. But they were tears of relief. They're really gone, she whispered. Gary? Mom? Gone, I said. Gary signed the papers. Joyce and Cheryl are facing felony charges. Mr. Henderson says they'll likely take a plea deal for probation and time served, but with the restraining orders and the loss of the house, they have nowhere to go. They'll have to leave town. Linda squeezed my hand. You saved my life. We saved each other, I said. I needed this too, Linda. I needed to fix my mistake. I never should have left you. You came back, she said. That's what matters. 2 weeks later, we were standing in the driveway of the house on Oak Street. It was empty. We had hired a crew to clear out everything. Gary's recliner, Joyce's floral sofas, Cheryl's tacky decorations. All of it went into a dumpster. We stripped the carpets. We painted the walls a bright, sunny yellow. We sold the house. We didn't want to live there. Too many ghosts. The market was hot, and even after paying off the fraudulent mortgage, which Mr. Henderson managed to negotiate down significantly due to the bank's negligence, we walked away with a decent sum. Added to the jar money in Penny's trust, we had a fresh start. We moved to Florida. Linda had always loved the ocean. She said the salt water cleansed the soul. We bought a small bungalow near the beach. It has a guest room for me, though I decided to stay permanently. I opened a self-defense gym for women. Linda helps manage the books. And Penny? Penny is the reason we wake up every morning. She's 5 now. She doesn't flinch when she drops a toy. She doesn't hide food in her pockets anymore. She laughs. Loud, belly laughs that sound like music. Yesterday, I was watching her build a sandcastle. She looked up and waved at me. Auntie Brenda. Look. It has a moat to keep the bad guys out. I smiled. It's perfect, baby. I looked at Linda, sitting on a beach chair, reading a book. Her scars are fading. The physical ones are almost gone. The mental ones will take longer, but she's healing. She's dating a nice guy, a librarian who speaks softly and asks permission before he holds her hand. Gary is out of jail, living in a trailer park 3 states away, working odd jobs. Joyce and Cheryl are reportedly living in a motel, still fighting over whose fault it was that they lost the fortune. They are miserable. And we are happy. That is the best revenge. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that moment in the dark bedroom. The moment I handed Joyce the frying pan, metaphorically speaking. It was a risk. It was dangerous. But then I look at my sister sleeping peacefully, safe and sound, and I know I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Because family isn't just blood. It's who you bleed for. And if you ever come for mine, well, you better make sure the lights stay on. And so, as the waves of justice finally washed away the darkness, this story leaves us with profound lessons about strength, resilience, and the unyielding power of love. It reminds us that even in the face of unimaginable cruelty, courage can rise from the deepest wounds, and healing can begin when we choose to fight for what truly matters. Brenda's unwavering determination to protect her sister and niece is a testament to the transformative power of standing up against oppression, no matter how insurmountable it may seem. This story also challenges us to reflect on the importance of self-worth and the bonds we create. Family is not just about shared blood but about the people who stand by us, who fight for us, and who believe in our worth when we forget it ourselves. It shows us that even when the world feels heavy, there is always a path forward if we have the courage to take that first step. What about you? What lessons did this story spark in your heart? Share your thoughts below, or simply comment good if this reflection resonates with you. Let's keep the conversation alive and inspire each other to be brave in the face of life's battles.